Where Peter is Live. I am Rachel Amiri. I'm your host. I'm joined by a regular little group of contributors here. We have Mike Lewis, editor.
Hi.
Where Peter is Ribnek.
Hi.
Melinda's here with us again. And today we have David Lafferty joining us all the way from Canada.
Hello.
Hey, David.
Hey.
How's the weather in Canada?
Raining. Yeah, but it's been good lately. It's been nice.
I got an email from a friend in Boston, and it's supposed to snow there tomorrow.
Oh, really?
Rude.
It was really nice and warm, and then just today it got cold. But
just today. Just today it got cold in Canada. Right.
We gotta keep people inside. We're not doing well right now in Ontario when it comes to the COVID stuff. So, and I think that's in part because Canada in springtime, the winter is so long and dark and everything, and then springtime comes, first warm weather, everyone just goes out and goes nuts, and they're doing walking around, talking, meeting each other all over the place, and so we've got a bit of a crisis going on, so we're supposed to all stay at home, but
it's tough after a year. Well, today we're going to be talking about dissent, discernment, and how to think with the church. We're going to open up with a prayer first, though. So this is just from Psalm 67. In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. O God, be gracious and bless us, and let your face shed its light upon us. So will your ways be known upon earth, and all nations learn your saving help. Let all the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you. The Lord is risen. Alleluia.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Amen.
I'm going to check that I don't have audio issues right now. I don't know if anyone else hears that.
Yeah, you sounded a little glitchy.
Dissent, discernment, and then you couldn't find a D word to summarize the rest of the stuff. What kind
Doom
of staff
bloggers.
do we have?
Prophets of doom.
Oh, doom. See, dissent. I like this. Dissent, discernment, and doom. There we go. Mike, you always come through for us.
No, I don't. Okay, I have a complaint about last week's episode.
Oh, my gosh.
I came in and I had the most fantastic story at the end, but then when I listened to it, it was like I was quiet. No one told me my mic was too low, but I did. Those of you who subscribe to us, wherever you listen to podcasts, the audio version, I did crank myself up a little bit. So if you want to just fast forward, I mean, not that the rest of the live stream wasn't exciting or whatever, interesting, fruitful, whatever. When I showed up, honestly, I mean, come on.
What the heck, Mike? When you showed up with your 2-hour-long story of your confession with your brother that never happened.
I didn't go to confession with my brother. That was the whole story.
That was the whole story, and we all missed it.
Maybe you should, Mike.
Maybe I should go to confession.
I think didn't you promise our Patreon subscribers I don't know a 2-hour version of that story or something?
If they donated $300 within the next, I didn't actually give an amount of time because somebody cut me off. But
that's worth it for sure.
If somebody donates $300 to Where Peter Is Patreon in the next before midnight, I will talk at you for 2 hours about anything you want. Anything.
And I will personally judge you for your life choices and your stewardship of $300.
Mike, we held down the show for you last week, and you just joined us at the last minute, which was very exciting. Yes. But you also can't expect us to be quality checking your mic.
And I didn't give you a chance to say anything either, so.
Well, and we don't make fun of sick people. You're like, hey, I just got back from eye surgery, so we're not going to be like, Mike, your mic sucks. We're like, hey, you're not, you survived. We were so happy.
Jill and Michael have a question.
Oh, boy.
Is that the next, aren't they cute?
That's my friend, Jill. Hi, Jill.
The next, actually, it's any midnight.
Any midnight.
Send
us $300 any midnight.
Any midnight, any day.
Podcast from Michael Lewis.
Melinda will join me for part of it. It'll be like a variety show. I'll bring in guests.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe even some celebrities.
Jill, save that $300 and we'll go out to dinner one night, okay?
On lockdown. There's nowhere to go.
Mm-mm.
So,
okay, sorry.
So we were going to catch up on a little bit of recent content on the site. We started a new series this week, Postcards from the Camino, which is from a new contributor who actually lives in Europe. He lives
in northern Spain.
Northern Spain, which
he's
is
an
where the
Englishman.
Camino de
Santiago.
Santiago. He's an Englishman who lives in Spain. And
with mules.
I mean, if I lived in like picturesque kind of like
he has a whole blog. I'm gonna
Spain.
hang on, let me find
Why
it.
do I have it?
I would want to have animals too.
We're about to see mule videos. Like this always happens. Bishop Humberts comes on and Mike shows us kangaroo videos. Now the raccoon thing, it's gonna be mules every day now. Like
his
Mike,
website.
I see the
I'm
face.
just gonna put the link to Gareth's website in the comments. I'm not gonna read you this blog post.
Okay, but we have postcard number 1 up on our site. It's a reflection from Samos Abbey, which is one stop on the Camino, and it's kind of his reflection on. Do you want to fill us in, Mike, or it's his reflection on?
So basically,
people in Spain.
What he proposed to me. So Gareth, he's a convert to the Catholic Church, I believe, as a young adult, and he spent, I think, most of his life, like he wrote a piece about vocation. And I think his second piece was something like the vocation is in the journey, because he's tried his hand at being a Carthusian monk. He's been a Franciscan. Now he's living the life of a hermit. Really fascinating guy, and he has a really strong, just a really strong command of the language, like really, really interesting writer. Like when you read his work, it's like a sense of place. And that's always appealed to me, just the setting. But he proposed to me because he spent a lot of his life in Spain. He was a student, a few years as a student in Spain, went on pilgrimage in 1980 when he was a Franciscan, and now he lives there. So he proposed to write this piece, or this series called Postcards from the Camino. And the Camino, of course, is one of the 3 main pilgrimage routes in Europe. It's historic. It starts in like Bilbao, Spain, or basically the top of Spain near France, and it goes along the coast. It's an ancient pilgrim trail, and there are a lot of stops along the way, and then you finally reach the shrine of St. James, Santiago, at the end of this pilgrim trail, which is where the bones of St. James, by tradition, have been laid. And one of the traditions is there are these little towns that you stop in, and basically these shelters for people, and a lot of them are religious pilgrims. Some are going for exercise or for self-discovery or just going along with a group. But he spent a lot of time there, and so the first installment that he wrote is about one town that he visited once as like a schoolboy, like young teenager with his class. And they had a blue school uniform that looked a lot like Franco's army. It was post Spanish Civil War. And basically there was a beggar that spat at them because he was dressed like.
Oh no!
Oh, you don't. We are bodily fluids. No, but the reason why was because this is a town that had sided with the communists, and they had been very mistreated by the monks in the abbey in the town after the Civil War. They were starving, right? And so he revisited it again when he was when as an adult, as a Franciscan, and he was staying at this abbey, and people were asking him, or the bartender was like, well, isn't it past curfew at the monastery? And he's like, oh, I'm just traveling through, I'm not a monk. And had this conversation of the post Spanish Civil War era, and why there was a lot of resentment against the church. And the bartender and some of the people in the bar were just sort of telling him what happened. The people were going hungry, and in the monastery, the monks had food, but they refused to give it to the people because they had sided with the enemy.
Right.
And what's that? Well, yeah. And so I don't know if that's the right tone.
We got people spitting on people not sharing their food. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I mean, that was the reason why he was spat on, though, was because of the way that they were treated. And he was dressed similar to like the pro-Franco, pro-fascist Spaniards. And so I think one of the things, and it's one of the things that Pope Francis has had to reckon with, or has tried to get us to reckon with, is a lot of the things that the church, during the era of Christendom, when the church had a lot of power, or, you know, when governments, you know, there are all these nationalistic governments that had the backing of the church, the way that they treated ordinary people a lot of times was unjust. And so there's a lot of resentment against the church in the world that is, you know, it's justifiable. And I think we need, as Catholics, we need to be aware of just how hurt, and it's not the church itself, it's the human element of the church.
I mean, it's the people of God who are the church. So it's always tricky. You can't really separate, you know, the institution from the people. Like, you can, and say that, you know, the gates of hell aren't going to prevail against the body of Christ. But at the same time, the people who act in the name of the church are especially like going to corrupt the faith in the eyes of others. Like,
and I think it's this kind of intolerance that people have experienced at the hands of the church. And one of the things is, as we've been going through this era, you know, during the 20th century, you know, probably going back to the French Revolution, when secularization and anti-clericalism, anti-church sentiment, really anti-religion sentiment really started to kick in, the church's first reflex was to push back against that aggressively. And I think a lot of those instincts are what Vatican II, for one thing, tried to correct. But obviously, as you know, even today, there's still resistance to Vatican II, or there's still a hesitancy to accept this. How is the church going to exist in the modern world? And, you know, that Vatican II promoted, and that we've seen through John Paul II and through Pope Benedict. But I mean, Francis, it's totally unavoidable. But he was formed as a Jesuit during the 60s. He was ordained a priest in 1969, but I think he was in for about 10 years before he was ordained, which encompassed all of Vatican II, which encompassed the liturgical changes, which encompassed this new theology and scriptural study that has really defined the church since that time. Anyway, I think he is very interested in how to engage the world, but not from a place of temporal power. If that makes sense.
It's a response to, you know, secularization is not just happening like in a vacuum, like apart from what the church has done. And it's often a response to the exercise of temporal power by the church in various places. So like in France, or even in Ireland, you see, like, Ireland is massively secularized in the past, you know, 50 years, after just, you know, Irish Catholicism was just this kind of exemplar to the rest of the world. Like, being Irish and being Catholic were synonymous, and now they are not. And a lot of that is because of the institutional failures in Ireland, and people becoming aware of, you know, the laundries and the orphanages and the abuses of people, and sexual abuse in the church. And a lot of the secularization that the church sees taking place, it's not just like we need to react against that. It's we need to acknowledge our role, and kind of not be defensive, but also say people are responding to things that we have done wrong, our sins, and the first step is acknowledging that. And I do see that shift, especially since Vatican II, like you said, in, you know, JP2 famously apologized for a lot of the sins that the church that had been committed in the name of the church. And we just sort of evolved in kind of that approach since then.
And the reaction to this sort of political alliance of the church with particular political powers tends to be a very strong counter-reaction. I mean, we had the same thing in Canada, in Quebec, which was deeply, deeply Catholic, especially during the period of Duplessis, when he was premier. And after that, there was what's called the Quiet Revolution, and incredible secularization, and just almost a complete abandonment of that Catholic heritage, because it just felt so stifling. There were so many difficult memories associated with it. It seemed to be completely at odds with the way the world was going. So that's something that, the church kind of runs into it again and again, is, it kind of goes all in on something, and then there's this huge blowback, which and you get this secularization. I mean, the same thing happened, in Spain as well, after Franco over time.
Around what year was that in Canada? Like, when did the big decline or the huge secularization happen in Quebec?
It would have been like in the 60s. I don't know the history of it all that well. It's something that I haven't, explored. Conrad Black actually wrote a book on it, on Duplessis, the Duplessis era, which I have, but I haven't read yet. It was sort of, it reached its height, I think, during the like 1950s, and then completely fell apart in the 60s.
That's interesting. Like, because I know Ireland was sort of an outlier. A lot of people obviously placed the blame on Vatican II, but Quebec and a lot of places in Europe seem to, the timing seems to have coincided with leading the lead up and then the aftermath of Vatican II. Like the United States, they always talk about the summer of '69 and the sexual revolution, which just so happened coincided with the Novus Ordo, and the birth control pill happened when the Vatican II was going on. So, but one thing, I have friends who are Irish, and maybe if there are anyone from Ireland is watching, my understanding, or what I've been told, is their sexual revolution, their secularization, really started in the early 1980s. Mm-hmm. Like they didn't have that Vatican II decline. Their mass attendance stayed high. Now, their vocations crisis is bigger than ours. Their mass attendance is lower than ours is in the U.S. But it's funny because it didn't always correlate with the council. And I know Germany, for example, their vocations crisis started well before Vatican II. It just happened that 65 was like our peak year in the US. So I think it's one of those things where people don't always have a global perspective. They see what's happening in the church around them, and they think, and so they're going to attribute what's going on in Rome, and they're going to tie it to what happened in the United States, when that's not always the case, or is rarely the case.
Yeah, for a lot of people in Europe, World War I would have actually been the sort of earth-shattering experience that kind of blew away all the values that people had previously held, including religious values. Certainly, when you look at the modernist authors, the modernist literature that I've studied, these are all people who were completely damaged, like very severely spiritually, mentally, even physically, sometimes damaged by the First World War, and trying to pick up the pieces afterwards. And you don't get that in the United States or in North America. It just didn't have that same sort of earth-shattering experience, and it had to wait until the after World War II and then the 1960s, before you get that sort of real secularization and questioning of a lot of traditions and that sort of thing.
It's almost as if Vatican II isn't to blame for all of these various crises. And there are other factors that led to the loss of faith and secularization accelerating in different places in slightly different times. But for similar kind of thematic reasons, but not, we can't pinpoint, it was 1968 and Vatican II.
Yeah, I mean, Vatican II in a lot of ways, like they always say that that every council is addressing a different heresy, right? It's the response to the heresy. People talk about the Council of Trent, which not only does it respond to the heresy, but the heresy is usually attached to, it's a response to a problem in the church, an abuse in the church. So the Protestant Reformation, a lot of it was tied to the poor formation of priests. A lot of it was tied to this collecting of, the buying indulgences, corruption and simony in the church. And the Council of Trent was a reforming council. There were aspects of Trent that actually were taken from a lot of the critiques that were made of the church by people like Martin Luther. And in the same way, Vatican II was a response to modernism. Like modernism, in a lot of ways, so what they were arguing was that the church was too closed to different possibilities, was too rigid, was too too formulaic, too systematic, out of touch with the modern world. Because I mean, Trent, one of the things that Trent did in reforming liturgy was to freeze it. Like liturgy develops for the first 1500 years of the church. You get the good and the bad with that. There were different rites developing and there were certain abuses, but there was an organic flow, just like how they talk about how one of the critiques actually of the Novus Ordo was that, of our current English or vernacular mass, was that the change wasn't organic. But the problem was, because of the Council of Trent and needing to hone in or, rein in all these abuses, they basically froze the liturgy for 400 years. There was no development, organic or otherwise. I mean, adding a saint to a prayer here, changing the calendar there, but no major changes and no major reforms in liturgy. So I think even though people critique the post-Vatican II Mass, a lot of it was just common sense reforms that had been talked about but never implemented because there was no development in the liturgy for so long.
That's interesting, Mike. You say that Vatican II was a response to modernism, because some hardcore traditionalists think that Vatican II was like the triumph of modernism, right? But I think you're actually right. I think that the crackdown on modernism that happened in the around 1910 or so, that was a case where the church was saying, no, you're not going to sort of revolutionize the way of thinking in the church from below. We're going to do it on our own terms. We're going to come to grips with modernity, altogether, through an actual council. And that's what I think Vatican II represented. And it didn't use the sort of same methods of thinking that modernism tried to bring into the church. It was still grounded in tradition. It was still, grounded in a very Catholic way of thinking. Whereas, true modernism from the early 1900s was grounded in modern philosophy. It was grounded in Hegel and Kant and those types. So this was, a case where the church had to kind of put the boot down for a little bit, to put things on hold until the church could actually grapple with the questions of modernity on a much bigger scale and in a more organized way.
So kind of speaking about how, in even that Camino de Santiago piece that we ran, thinking about how the church's response or the perception of the church by ordinary people has kind of framed a lot of the development we've seen in secularization or just kind of different trends. Pope Francis today, there was a conference about his recent book with Austin Ivory, Let Us Dream, and he had pre-recorded address that was broadcast as part of this conference. And the conference was co-sponsored by the Catholic Campaign for Human Development and a bunch of other organizations like Loyola University, and several different like universities and schools just around the world. And there was lots of different sessions, but his kind of kicked it off. And in that, he did talk about a new version of politics, not populism itself, but what he called popularism or inclusive populism that really attends to the people on the peripheries, as he often likes to talk about, but to those ordinary people and understanding both their needs and their movements and their intentions, but also like responding to them in a way that like is trying to be understanding and inclusive. David, I believe you said you caught parts of this conference today. I don't know if you had any impressions you'd like to share.
Yeah, I caught. I had a chance to watch some of it, and I thought the discussion was, really fascinating. And I got to admit, what came to mind was, we at where Peter is, we've received some, criticism for being, maybe too political or moving into, what some people call like kind of woke territory, that sort of thing, where you're talking about a lot about social justice and, structural inequalities and things like that. But that's exactly what they were talking about at this conference. I mean, one of the sessions that I had a chance to listen to was on structural inequalities in society as revealed by the pandemic. And these are things that, Pope Francis was talking about in Let Us Dream. So it kind of reinforced the idea that there's no way we can sort of hold ourselves above politics, hold ourselves above the political. What matters is the way we approach it. And I think we really have to listen to Pope Francis when he's providing this kind of guidance, because, what he's pointing to with this idea of, listening to the people, I think, is this idea of not listening to the ideologues or the people who are pushing these kind of, ideologies and trying to get everyone to sort of follow them, but listen to the actual people. So like listen to people in their concrete situations and work with that. I think, we saw this conflict when during the Amazon Synod, when, the whole issue of what are they called? The Viri Probati came up, right? And I think, it seemed like Pope Francis was allowing this to be talked about because he saw that there was a real concrete human need in the Amazon region, and that maybe this idea of allowing, certain married men to exercise the function of a priest would be a solution to that. But then it became sort of caught up in this big ideological campaign about, married priests, and then you had the sort of like the German side of things where they were trying to push the idea, and then you had the reactionary side of things where they were trying to stop it. And I think that frustrated Pope Francis because he really wanted to listen to the people and let that guide any kind of change that's going to happen. So I think that's the key, is that we always have to look to the people for change, look to especially to the margins, right? It's people at the margins who end up creating political change a lot of the time. So that's where we have to be centered.
Yeah, it's interesting because I got in a little bit of trouble today on Twitter because I tweeted out that I was watching a bit of the conference too, and I tweeted out that Austin Ivory had said, every diocese should be involved with the populist, movements of their diocese and that kind of thing. And he was like, no, Melinda, people's movement. And I was like, yes, that's what I meant to say. But, it's interesting because that mistake was pretty formidable, because part of the conference, the Pope did start talking about the difference between, populism, where it can take a paternalistic vibe, where you end up having an elite group, right, who is trying to supposedly voice for, the common man or the people, right? But oftentimes it just becomes another ideology that might appeal to the people, but really isn't the people. It's allegedly working for the people, but not with the people, right? And so he kind of distinguished that. in this conference, and then I totally misquoted it on Twitter. But it was a really interesting thing. And back to that like original quote that Austin was discussing from Let Us Dream and from the Pope's vision, this idea that dioceses should be working with these people's movements, right? Like when we apply it to our current situation, I could not help but to think about like Black Lives Matter and this kind of like disconnect, because Black Lives Matter is a people's movement, right? It's a marginalized group of people who are trying to come together for a movement for a racial justice, right? And so that is what I just kept thinking of over and over and over when he's talking about like how dioceses and people and Catholics should be involved in these movements, right? And the disconnect is oftentimes what you hear online or in person too, is that, oh, I don't want to get involved. It's too political, right? But this idea that no, like we shouldn't be scared of the messiness of politics, right? And that we should take an active role into working with the people who have these grievances, even in the political arena. Austin even talked about how sometimes, people can come together and you may be a Catholic working next to a Muslim, but you're working in the same movements for these causes for the oppressed. And he talked about even the joy that comes from actually working hands-on in these movements. And so this kind of call for us to take part in these people's movements is what I got a lot from the conference today.
Well, and I think that's something that Pope Francis was really trying to emphasize in his vision of fraternity for the church. I mean, Austin gave the example of working side by side with a Muslim towards a common goal. And one of the things that Pope Francis, in his description of if you do have a conflict with someone, the answer isn't to bury it or to hide it or pretend it doesn't exist. Like, obviously, there are huge theological, social, cultural differences between the West and the Muslim world. And somebody from that background, from a Muslim background, isn't going to be the same as you. But that shouldn't hinder you from, while yes, we acknowledge that we have these two different things, we can hold that intention while we work together to feed the hungry or to make sure people have housing or health care. And another thing that, talking about the margins, and I have a friend that I used to work with for the church, and we've kept in touch. The talk about the periphery and the margins, a lot of times we use it in terms of go out to the periphery to help the people over there. And I think I was kind of using that language in just sort of having this conversation about Francis's vision with her a couple of years ago. And she stopped me mid-sentence. She's one of those people that love her, but it's one of those things where it's like, no, you didn't use the right word there. You're going to need to like roll that one back and say it again this way. And the thing that she really brought out was, no, you're not going out to the margins. You are working with the margins. Mm-hmm. You are in solidarity with those on the margins. You're bringing yourself to be on the margin, as opposed to go to, like, if that makes sense. And it also reminds me of, and I think I wrote a brief piece about this a long time ago, and don't bother looking for it because I have no idea what else it was about, but it was, well, our viewers and listeners can do that if they want. But during an audience, Pope Francis spoke about letting the poor evangelize us. Mm-hmm. We serve the poor so that they are available to us to evangelize us. It's not us going out to show them a thing or two. I mean, yeah, we're helping to provide for their physical needs, but the trade-off in the end, we get so much more out of the deal. Mm-hmm.
Right. And he emphasized that in his talk today. He said he emphasized the dangers of basically not doing that by showing what meeting the poor really gives to the church. He said meeting the poor gives missionary vigor. If the church disowns the poor, she ceases to be the church of Jesus and falls back on the tendency to be an intellectual or moral elite. And he called that a new form of Pelagianism, which is a theme he's used before in different documents like Gaudete et Exultate, I believe. But he likes to talk about new Pelagianism. Just we are working for our own kind of ideas of what the church is and what God wants us to do, but we're not actually in contact with the people that Jesus calls us to serve.
And I used that term in my blog post on Friday.
You did. Because you just can predict what Pope Francis is going to talk about, Mike Lewis.
Oh, Lord, don't
At that
No,
point.
I'm just saying, I was trying to like,
You're
you said we were going to talk about the blog post,
Yeah.
and I was trying to like steer you. So
Here
that
we
you
go.
could
We're
steer
steering.
us.
We're steering in that direction.
What was that blog post about, Rachel?
Your post on Friday, the left and right dissent, Mike Lewis. Are you asking me to summarize your own post?
What'd you get out of it?
What did I get out
I
of
wrote it. I mean,
I got nothing out of it.
He's reverse hosting the podcast.
It's terrible.
So it's been a kind of a growing criticism, I guess, that, you know, we aren't at WPI as hard on dissent when it comes from the left as we are on dissent from the right. So you were basically responding to that by, you know, talking about the mission of the website and how we care more about, or these are your people. I think you said something like, these are my people. This is my margin. These are my people.
My minority, I think.
My minority. There you go.
It's such a small group of people. These.
It is. We're the subset of a subset.
Yeah.
But we're preoccupied with dissent on the right because, well, there's a few different reasons. It's our people, and the way that it's presented from the right, this is true Catholicism. This is orthodoxy. This is what it means to be faithful, is to approach the magisterium in this way, or to kind of distance ourselves from Pope Francis, or to be suspicious of social justice efforts. And that is that's an insidious kind of approach to an insidious form of dissent.
Yeah.
I would say that's a fair summary of your
that
perspective.
that is a fair summary. Basically, all along the way, you know, I tweet out a piece about Strickland rejecting the CDF's teaching on vaccines, or on whatever Vigano has cooked up this week, calling Pope Francis the devil. And I get like 4 or 5 different responses. It's always, well, when was the last time you wrote about the German Synod? Or what about Father James Martin? You never criticize him. Or what about, you know, how come we haven't seen your piece yet on this thing that, you know, the NCR, National Catholic Reporter, wrote their editorial against the CDF document that came out recently. And people are like, you were silent on that. I mean, David, it's funny because...
Didn't you retweet it? Or you did?
David quote tweeted it and said, this, you know, he disagreed with it. He said, this isn't a betrayal. This is who Pope Francis is. You know, and I replied and I said, I seconded it. But somebody's like, yeah, we haven't heard from where Peter is on this. And like, I, you know, put a screenshot of that tweet and that response. And then the person was like, well, you did it in a response. You didn't put it on your own timeline. You know, I mean, there's just no... It's
never really enough.
Several people. And then they're like, why didn't you write a piece about this? And to me, it's like the National Catholic Reporter disagreed with a teaching of the Catholic Church. Okay. Like, and water is wet and dogs bark. No, I'm not even, but the thing is, it's like, isn't that what now there, okay. Now to be fair to the National Catholic Reporter, there are a number of writers that are, first of all, that are very devoted to the church. Several of them that I know personally are actually very are very faithful to the magisterium. Michael Sean Winters, for example, for all the flack he gets, and yes, he is a very politically minded person, but when it comes to church teaching on contraception and marriage and abortion, like, he's called out, the Catholic left isn't strong enough on abortion, which is true. Sometimes they just act like it's not even an issue. But because he, promotes certain candidates or likes certain bishops, he's a dissident according to them. But that's not, the window has shifted. But so to me, though, it's like, okay, a bunch of, liberal church volunteers in Germany disagree with church teaching on, it's like, to me, that's okay. That's, first of all, EWTN, National Catholic Register, all of these other organizations have been attacking them for years. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to me, what our mission is, what we actually were founded to respond to, were these accusations were these claims that the Pope can be a heretic. Pope Francis is a heretic. We should ignore Pope Francis. Pope Francis's teachings aren't valid. Death penalty is great. Climate change is a hoax, and we should ignore Laudato Si. Amoris Laetitia doesn't say what it clearly says, or Amoris Laetitia isn't a valid document. I mean, some of these things are not just dissent from the magisterium, but they're a denial of reality.
Well, and they're refusal too to let yourself be guided by the Holy Spirit working through the Pope to guide the church. And if you look at the things that Pope Francis is currently addressing, we have things like legalism, right? He's very clear about trying to chip away at some of the legalism he sees. Well, that is predominantly on the right. Right. Yeah. So I think for so long, people saw they perceived the magisterium under some of these past popes as, attacking, as addressing issues that pertain to maybe the left, sexual politics, whatever. Right. But now we have a pope who's like, wait, hold up. There's a lot of people being legalistic. There's a lot of people being pharisaical.
Yeah.
What's the adjective form of Pharisee? But you got me. So, these are the things that he's like, wait, there's a huge problem. The unbridled capitalism, the lack of focus on Catholic social teaching. All of these things are the Pope's focus. So if you're going to move, not that he isn't concerned. I mean, we have Amoris Laetitia, which I'm working on my chapter study guide. I'll get that soon. But we have that one, which he does address a lot of family and sexual issues or whatever. But for the most part, he's seeing this need, particularly of the Western Church, to renew its Catholic social teaching, to combat legalism, to combat these other problems. And so if you are moving in with the spirit of what the Pope is doing and where he is trying to lead us, you also are going to start addressing these issues. And these are issues predominantly on the right. I think you can take both sidism to a fault, to be well, both sides are equally problematic, or both sides have the exact same amount of problems. Why aren't you giving them the most attention? Well, because one is burning down right now. One is on the verge of schism right now. One is proclaiming things actually are church teaching, which are not, and doing so in well-funded campaigns. So, I don't know. That was my thought with the whole flack that we get for dissenting or picking on the right versus the left. I don't know that I identify all the way as the right as my people. WPI is a mixed, right? Yeah. But I would say I identify with the mission of Pope Francis to kind of combat some of the hypocrisy, the legalism, all of these things that are giving us a lot of problems in the church right now, particularly the Western Church.
Well, and one of the things is we talk, English-speaking conservative Catholics love Gilbert K. Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton, the British writer. And I guess there was one of there was a call from one of the newspapers where it was sort of, the question was, what is wrong with the world? And all these thinkers and journalists and writers and scientists wrote back these lengthy responses about what's wrong with the world. And of course, the humorist or the clever turn of the phrase guy, G.K. Chesterton, wrote, his response was, I am. And the funny thing is, the people who seem to love G.K. Chesterton the most today don't do that level of introspection. It wasn't just flippant. I mean, one of the things, it's like all this stuff is happening out in the world, and we can't stop people from being from turning against the church, from disagreeing with us, from stopping to go to mass, from voting certain ways, for promoting certain issues, for engaging in certain types of. There's really very little we can do. I mean, and even if we did have that ability, it would be coercion, which is one of the reasons why we're in this situation, because the church was previously in a situation to coerce. But what can we change? That's one of the, that whole psychological thing. What can you change? You can change yourself.
Right.
And so Pope Francis is saying, just like Chesterton did way back when, let's look at ourselves as a church. What have we done wrong? Where have we not lived up to the Christian ideal? Where have we not been welcoming? Where have we not expressed unconditional love? Like, that's one of the things, there's always, one of the things that's always struck me is with LGBT people, or with people who are living in some kind of like sexual sin, or people who have done such and such in their lives, or like, let's say they're, somebody whose kid has fallen away from the faith, or who has left the church. And it's sort of like, okay, these things are serious. People have free will. They make these decisions. And when we address it, we can't always do it with a but, and I brought this up, and then Melinda laughs because I use that word after the show. But it's like we need to express that kindness and that welcome. Zacchaeus, come down from the tree and invite me over. Invite me over to your house for dinner. And we haven't had that kind of welcome. There are people who hold contempt for one. And I mean, granted, I think we all fall into that, but
I think this is too the issue with the whole why, because I'm personally also harder on the right than the left, but the idea is it's because the right is directly trying to present themselves as the church. So if you're going to present yourself as the church, even over like the Pope or whoever, but if you are going to present yourself as the church, like, you had better present yourself correctly. If you want to be on the left and dissenting from some of the church's teachings on the left, and you are who you say you are, that's cool. But don't be on the right and say, I am the church, and then present yourself as racist, homophobic, as legalistic, as Pharisaical.
How about just say, like Pharisees?
Like Pharisees.
Like, that's my issue with it. And part of it comes from, like, I personally have a heart for those who I see who are affected by some of the hate and the policies and that kind of thing. But also I think at the root of it, as much as I care for those people who are affected by some of the bigotry and stuff I see on the right, I think, as much as I love those people, I think for me, where it really burns me and it really gets me moved, is thinking that you're presenting my church and my God in a way that is not who they are. And you don't get to do that. You don't get to do that because Joe Schmo or Taylor Marshall or Tim Gordon on the internet told you he was more important than the Pope. You don't get to present who God is and who my church is falsely. And you don't get to say that your definition of Catholic is one over the church's authority. And so that's where I kind of that's why for me, it's a thing because, one, I have a heart for those who are obviously on the margins and being oppressed by these people, but also how dare you? And this is more problematic on the right than the left. This idea that they're half a step out of schism because their authority is more valid than the Pope's.
Yeah, and they don't acknowledge that. And that really was the theme of my piece. It was, I mean, at first I thought maybe they wanted to be obedient to the Pope, like, you know, back early in the papacy, but they were confused or they didn't understand him. And like one of the things early on when Amoris Laetitia came out was Cardinal Burke the next day said, it's not a document of the magisterium. And his reason was a total misreading of paragraph 3, which basically said, not every issue has to be addressed by the magisterium. It didn't say this entire thing is not magisterial. And then the other thing is that footnote, the famous footnote. They said it's not clear. It's not clear.
I mean, that's better than what we have now, which is word counts, like word function searches.
Well, no, but this is what serious theologians are holding. Like, I got into an exchange with a professor at the John Paul II Institute because he claimed that Amoris Laetitia wasn't clear, and it was just some thoughts of Pope Francis. And and paragraph 3, he didn't go quite as far as Burke, but said that, you know, some of these things might not be really what the church. But the thing is, when the Buenos Aires directives, so basically the question was, are there any cases where somebody who is living in a state of objective sin, like they're divorced or remarried, but because of certain circumstances in their lives, it could be tragic, it could be desperation, like, you know, where they aren't entirely culpable. We know that mortal sin is not just the act. It's not just the gravity of the act. It's having full knowledge, which isn't really the issue in the case of these, because obviously you can explain, oh, well, you're not supposed to be divorced and remarried. Okay, well, they understand that but it's whether they have full consent of the will. And the rigid, the Catholic right, the people who opposed, and Rodrigo Guerra in our podcast, he was there at the 2014 Synod, and he was like, there was this whole campaign, this media campaign, it was like war.
Yeah.
But anyway, so they pretend there's all this confusion after the document comes out. They're very hostile to it, and the dubia are submitted, which is, to me, it's like the ultimate act of disrespect to the Pope. To, like, I mean, basically 4 cardinals accused the Pope, that dared the Pope to say I'm a heretic with these passive aggressive questions, and I still get worked up about it. But
we can tell, Mike. We can tell.
Okay, I'm skipping the dubia. But then the Buenos Aires. Okay. So then what happened was the bishops of Buenos Aires they wrote out some guidelines. Okay, well, under these circumstances, the ones I just described, you know, in individual cases, case by case, during pastoral accompaniment, when all other alternatives have been exhausted, the person might be able to be admitted back to the sacraments. And the Pope responded to it and wrote that this is correct. There are no other interpretations. And then he had it published in the Acta Apollos, in the Apostolic Acts, said, this is magisterial. Like these guidelines need to be published as authentic magisterium. Like, he put a red rubber stamp on it, said magisterial. And I thought, oh, wow, okay, the debate's over. Because
thank you for the clarity.
Thank you for the clarity. These guidelines say step by step.
Was it actually like red and rubber?
I imagine it that way, but I have not seen the original document.
They have a stock of those in the
back. But so it was clear. This is the official. This is the official church teaching, and they still fought back. They still refused it. They still said it. So, David, I don't know what your thoughts are.
No, sorry. Like, I was just going to say, it was something that you brought up about how Pope Francis, you know, said that not everything has to be addressed sort of by the magisterium. I think there is something we can learn from that, which is that, you know, there's a lot of things that are in that Pope Francis says that are in his, you know, the documents that he delivers and his, you know, talks and all these things that are not necessarily, you know, like binding magisterial teaching, but he's trying to get us to think a certain way, right? He's trying to he's trying to get us to think along with him, along in a certain sort of framework. And that's what I find is sometimes missing when you have people who do support Pope Francis, but they take a sort of view of him as like a sort of, you know, abstract dispenser of sort of magisterial teaching. And I saw this come up when the CDF document came out on the gay unions there, and people were like, why aren't you going after all these people who are disappointed and angry about it? Why can't they just accept church teaching and shut up, and that sort of thing? Well, the reason is that Pope Francis, in his sort of non-magisterial interviews and just the things that he's talked about over the years, he's led us to think a certain way about LGBTQ people, and has created a sort of new approach, that the church can take, I think, towards LGBTQ people. So that's why some people, see him as an ally in that respect. And so there's this kind of understandable, sense of disappointment if something comes out that seems kind of harsh, seems kind of judgmental when it comes to LGBTQ people. And it seems to not correspond with that way of thinking that Pope Francis has been cultivating. Now, it's the same when it comes to kind of larger issues of like social justice and things like that. I wonder, like, some of these people who are, criticizing, say, like, us for getting, involved in these sort of things or talking about them. Have they been reading Pope Francis? Have they been reading Let Us Dream? Have they been reading Fratelli Tutti?
Right.
Like, where are they? Like, I mean, if you're reading that kind of stuff, you're realizing it's going to open up our minds. Now, there's certain, I think, he's not afraid to, use the CDF or his own, statements to tell us when, this is too far, or this is, something that you shouldn't do. He's been very clear when it comes to, the church in Germany, in that the letter that he wrote regarding the synodal way, where it was a mix of sort of like, praise, like, I really, this is important, this is this journey that you're taking, but you got to make sure you're doing it the right way, and I'm worried that you're not doing it the right way, and I'm worried that you take things too far. You're going to try to do things without truly discerning them. You're going to try to change things on a sort of ideological level, and not really focus on concrete situations and the voice of the people and that sort of thing. So he really is calling us to change and take new perspectives. So I don't think, it frustrated me that when that CDF document came out, that some people saw it as an excuse to say, oh, well, everything that Pope Francis had been sort of signaling towards when it came to LGBTQ people, that was all just nonsense. And this is the real deal now. We're not going to have any progress. It's just going to be nothing, I think what you have to do is you have to read these things in context and read them according to the way that Pope Francis is sort of asking us to read them.
Sorry. Can I?
Go for it, Mike.
Okay. David, you remind me of this. There was a genre from about 2013 to 2016 or 2017 of, so there were people who would write a defense of Pope Francis. There were people who hated him right away, but he would say something or he'd teach something, and they'd try to sort of bend it into the 2012 version of U.S. conservative Catholicism. Basically twist it so that, and then you would get, after 3, 4, 5 years, you would get this manifesto. I've tried to defend Pope Francis for so many years, but after this one thing happened, I can do it no longer. Clearly, he's trying to destroy the church, and he's not Orthodox, and he's the worst pope ever. I mean, Matthew Schmitz, Phil Lawler, Robert Royal, Taylor Marshall. I mean, a lot of these guys tried to do that, and then like a switch flipped, and they became totally anti-Francis. Rusty Reno. I mean, Father Wynandy. Father Wynandy said he was not going to criticize the Pope besides that one open letter that he wrote that the Pope never responded to, that he decided to publicize worldwide. He said he wasn't going to say it. Now, you can't shut the guy up. All he does is criticize the Pope. And because they turned, and like Dan, your dear husband, Dan Amiri, wrote a piece once. Phil Lawler, who writes for Catholic Culture,
What did Dan do? Wait.
Yeah, let's talk about Rachel's husband. Rachel, talk about Dan.
Can I talk? Am I rambling? Are we
on this list?
Yeah.
You want to just cut me off and end the show
Dan
right
on
now?
this list of other
I
people
was
no.
gonna say you're like this.
He wrote a
I'm just
piece
confused.
about Phil Lawler. So Phil Lawler in 2015, when he was still trying to defend Francis, wrote these wonderful things about Laudato Si and quoted these things. Then in 2020 or 2021, when he hates Pope Francis, he writes a piece trashing Pope Francis, and he's using the same quotes that he praised 5 years before. I mean, it's like their minds become determined to destroy him, to undermine him. And this is where I think where Peter is different. And I'm not boasting, but this is all of you. This is our readers, the people who have supported us, all of our contributors, is that rather than trying to twist Francis into our version of Catholicism, we are receiving the teachings of Pope Francis. We are letting Pope Francis teach us. And sometimes, and I'm not saying that, I mean, the CDF document is a whole other story, but there's sometimes when Pope Francis does something that really makes us wonder. Like, this isn't, and it's funny because we're following him so closely. I mean, just sort of the big example is when the lady yanked his arm and he slapped her hand. I mean, obviously it was a natural reaction, but it's like, isn't he supposed to be charitable?
Isn't he supposed to be a nice guy? Yeah.
Or I mean, David wrote the piece about the residential schools in Canada. Like, Pope Francis, if you want to do the Pope Francis thing, you really should reach out to these people in Canada who are suffering. And I'm not saying that we should go around bashing Pope Francis, but I think he's an instrument. He's been picked, he's been anointed to be our shepherd. God has known that Pope Francis would be with us since the beginning of before time. We were made for this moment. Now, that's not to say that every pope is perfect and every pope, but it's
You're
like
starting to sound like a movie again. Like,
The
we're gonna do
most
it.
ultramontanist.
Yeah, I want a promo here with lightning bolts and dramatic music, and yes, we need to find a Tim Gordon producer guy. Get us a "You were made for this moment" trailer. Yes.
But it is true that, what kind of distinguishes WPI is trying to think with Pope Francis and trying to see the direction he is moving and to understand what he's actually trying to say, and to understand that the church is, like, as he is the shepherd of the church, that it's not that he's necessarily like dragging the church along behind, but he's pointing out the direction that he sees the church moving in and that he is leading the church in. And so to know that we are thinking with the church does require some level of religious assent and docility to the Pope.
Well, and I want to say,
Which should not be controversial for Catholics, but
we're called religious assent is defined as like the assent of the mind and the will. And a focus on one of those without the other is where we often get in trouble. So there's a lot of people who will say like assent of the will, like, yes, we should do what the church says to do, right? But the church isn't just calling us to that. They're calling us to assent of the mind, which means that it takes work to figure out the mindset, to figure out the reasonings, to figure out the just all of the components of what the church is teaching, not just a set of laws. And so I think sometimes that's what's missing is this religious assent of the mind, not just actions, but of understanding. Like, God has died on the cross because he doesn't want us to be slaves. He doesn't want us to be robots, right? He wants us to be free thinking, free choosing people. So we have to, that's true religious assent, is to assent the mind, right? To grapple until you come to an understanding of what the church is teaching. And so as much as I personally am cool with being a Pope Francis stan and a Pope Francis fanboy, and I definitely want a trailer with some music after this, this is our moment. But it's not even just about how much I do or don't like, which I do like him, Pope Francis. It's about, like, for me, like personally, it's been about reading the primary documents throughout the last like 10 years. And the documents are prophetic. And some of the things I've sat with for years before really understanding, right? But it's kind of working through. And sometimes you live your life, and as you're living your life and the things are happening around you and you're encountering new things, certain teachings and stuff start to click and make sense. And so, anyway, without going into too much detail of all that, because we're also running out of time, that's like, for me, that's what's missing, is this idea of, as much as I want to be like a Pope Francis stan, is this idea of just like working through the primary documents, working through what he's actually writing to us and speaking to us in homilies and the encyclicals and all of that, and trying to assent our minds and our hearts, right, to understanding what he's saying. And that is what it is to be Catholic. The willingness to do this.
And you know, I think a lot of people look to the church and they value it because they think that the church will sort of, you know, dispense a sort of set of laws that allow you to, and if you follow them, you just live exactly the same way and
you'll be okay
forever, and nothing will change, and that's good, right? But I think it's the opposite. If you're really thinking with the church will force you to change in ways that you may be uncomfortable with. I mean, many people were uncomfortable with the changes, you know, at Vatican II, and are still, you know, grappling with it, right? But, you know, for me, it happened, you know, like say with Laudato Si, like when that was coming out, I was actually kind of really concerned about it. I was, because at the time, I was kind of a bit of a climate change, you know, mild climate change skeptic, you know, like kind of like, this is all kind of just overblown stuff, you know, like, and so I thought, oh, am I really going to have to like get on board because the Pope said so? But like, and now it took a little time, you know, it took me reading it and sitting with it and thinking it through. But now, you know, it's one of my, you know, favorite church documents ever. And it's, you know, really changed me in so many ways. So we have to be able to be brave enough to let the church change us. And that it can be kind of terrifying, but it's actually you know, one of the most exciting things I think about being Catholic is that, you know, we're all on this journey together, changing. And sometimes we'll be disappointed too. Sometimes things aren't going to change the way we want them to, but we got to go with that as well. And we got to, the church is going to shape us into some kind of new, you know, into a new way of living. And I think that's actually a great thing.
And I want to add this before we go. I know we're running out of time, but to that note, David, the whole fear of change, you know, as I was doing that Taylor Marshall infamous, like, article that never got posted that Mike keeps threatening to put up for Patreons. I was going through his
threatening. Oh, it's happening.
Oh no,
I just need to find it.
No. Okay, so I was going through his videos, and I will say, like, I mean, people are complex, right? So obviously I have very strong disagreements with this man. But the common thread that there was one video, I mean, it's a little cheeky, but he was like, and it's a little dramatic, but he was like addressing Pope Francis directly. And he was saying like, Pope Francis, please, we don't want this to be the case. We don't want, and basically what he was saying, the common thread through all of these videos was like, Pope Francis, I don't want change. I don't want you to change. I want to be able to rely on, he was saying, I want to be able to hold on to this. I want to be able to hold on to the church. I want to be able, and essentially also reading through some of his conversion story, you really get the sense that a big missing piece is this need to feel like he could have it under control if he just followed certain rules that never changed in the church. And I don't know if I'm articulating this completely well, but I think this is a real thing among some of these who feel very threatened right now with changes in the church and with this call to a sense more of the mind and to change in more complex ways than just being like, if I follow these rules, I will be okay. If I can understand the church in these very like pretty much simplistic terms, then I can control part of this and I can control my faith. And to some extent, I can control God and I can be okay. And I think that's the heart of a lot of this that we're seeing.
It's an understandable sort of human response to, you know, to a really, you know, rapidly changing world. And especially, you know, the last, you know, 4 or 5 years or so has been very, you know, it seems that things are very chaotic, and like Francis has said, you know, the sort of piecemeal World War III going on around the world, and, you know, a lot of things happening. So people want something to grab onto. But we learn, I think, as we grow, that trying to keep things the same and trying to have total control is often a recipe for disaster.
And he's very bad in the spiritual life. Although I did feel sorry for him because like you said, David, I can relate to that.
I saw that one too, and I felt that too.
Yeah.
I was like, I feel for him, on some
and I
level.
think that's the challenge, and that's what Pope Francis really invites everyone to really lean into, is the complexity and being okay with discernment and not expecting to have this set of instructions for the Catholic life and how it's going to look, but learning how to discern what God is asking us to do in different times and places, both individually in our own lives and then in the church as a whole. And so I think what we're getting to is kind of the dissent and the failures of thinking with the church that we see happening, with our people or the people who used to be our people, are so often both an intellectual failure and something else. There's some other ingredient there, a refusal to really go there, to be open, to open their heart to following, where Pope Francis is leading them, or just kind of a level of humility or something. There's some other ingredient there that isn't strictly the intellectual level, but
so I think we could probably talk about this forever.
We could.
I don't know. Maybe I have an idea. You're going to be on vacation, right, Rachel?
I am taking a break next week. Yes, I am.
I'm thinking maybe I might do maybe I'll do a bonus on maybe Sunday night or something if I'm free. I don't know. Maybe we've got this StreamYard thing. I don't know.
No $300 fee for that. No one needs to.
Well, if you pay $300, then I'll give you the HD Laserdisc version of it. With the director's commentary. It'll be my voice over everyone else's voices while they're talking, except for me, because maybe I'll.
I want to do your voiceover. Let me do your voiceover.
Oh, I know. We could do it the thing where so we could take an old one and then we could each do different people's voices and be and I could be hi, I'm David. I'm going to talk about conspiracy theories in Canada. And when his mouth is moving, and then you could do your impression of me. And no, I don't know.
No, I do Melinda. Melinda does me.
Well, you'll be out of town, so we'll bring in a comedy star to replace you.
Maybe Jeannie Gaffigan will come on.
Oh, okay. You guys are.
Jeannie's not watching right now. I don't know.
I might jump in just with the margarita or something.
Jeannie is our biggest. Jeannie is my biggest fan that anybody's ever heard of.
Okay,
Mike. Anyway, but what?
All right. So you're saying this topic will continue.
This topic might continue. I'm not making any commitment because I'm really flaky.
Promises. Okay.
But I don't know. Maybe
Rachel, once you're on vacation, the whole site is going to be very flaky.
There might only be 2 posts, and they might be in rapid succession at 2 a.m. on Wednesday next week. But how long are you gone?
9 days. I'll have my computer if you really need me.
No. Go on vacation.
No. Let that girl have time with her family. Okay. No.
I'll just if there's nothing on there, I'll just pop on the StreamYard and I'll just talk to the screen. Whoever's
but if you're
there,
talking
and
about
the
Dubia, if you're going to talk about the Dubia, I'm not coming for an hour.
Okay.
What if I talk about the Doobie Brothers?
Which Doobie? Who's the Doobie?
I don't even.
I will enjoy watching whatever you guys put together, just like Mike enjoyed watching us last week, and then I will return with criticisms.
Okay.
Do our viewers ever tell us what they want us to talk about? Because
they should. We have put out this request multiple times.
They say stuff that sometimes it's not very good with it. No, yeah, we don't like our audience at all. So
or if they want to leave a comment on any of, or send us an email.
Questions would be great.
Yeah, questions.
If you want to ask a question like life advice, I could dispense.
Oh my God.
Dating
things Mike Lewis can just show up and answer.
Do you need dating or love advice? How's your marriage going? Are you getting along with your parents? Okay. And I could just or if you have or if you're flunking like theology 101, and you need
I can help with that.
ideas for a paper to write, I could come up with all kinds of things.
I can help with that too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap up this episode. If you are listening,
We need Tim Gordon's production guy. And the Veritas Splinter.
I think those are separate, actually. But we will get a stunning new intro with lightning and just.
Can we get creepy mask pictures too?
In the future. No, we won't. But thank you for watching. Whoever sees you next week, they will be discussing something that I won't be around to moderate. But everyone have a great weekend, and thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.